On behalf of the Oxford Trust, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wood Centre for Innovation this evening for the first in the Exit Right series. Very briefly, the Trust was set up in 1985 as a charity to encourage the pursuit of science. At that side of the building, we have an innovation centre with R&D labs and offices for science and tech startups. And this side of the centre, we have a science education centre. It's the UK's first primary science education centre for which has indoor and outdoor facilities. Anyway, welcome all this evening.
Thank you. I don't need this, you can have that. Got my own microphone on. My name's Malin Svanberg Larsson. I'm a corporate partner with Freeths. We're up there at the end. We're a national full-service law firm, so we cover all of your business and personal legal needs, and we'll probably touch on both of those aspects as we go through tonight. We have been working with you and your team for a long time now. I don't want to say since day dot, but for a long time, including helping you move into this fantastic facility. So we're very excited to be able to work with all of our partners on this series of events. So welcome.
Welcome everybody. My name's Nikki Campling. I am the Ecosystem Manager for the Barclays Eagle Lab based here in the Wood Centre for Innovation. Some of you may be wondering what Eagle Labs do. You may have heard the name before. Essentially, we are a network supported by the wider Barclays organisation that helps startups and innovators with their continued growth. And we do this via a wealth of resources that we have, which include events, mentoring, various programmes in terms of access to finance, etc. But also probably the biggest value add is the external networks that we build up with our partners who are here this evening.
Thanks, and you're probably wondering what I'm doing here as well. So there are four of us up here, standing up here. So I'm Wendy, I am an Innovation Director. I work for Oxford Innovation, and the thing that joins us all three up is that the Oxford Trust is the charity that owns this amazing building, that Eagle Labs work and support companies within the building in a specific area of the building, and Oxford Innovation actually manages the building. So it may sound confusing, but we've all got this wonderful place in this Wood Centre ecosystem, and it all works absolutely brilliantly. So we speak and refer companies between us, so it all works well. And one of the things I just wanted to start off with was kind of setting the context for this meeting, in that, you know, why have we put this crazy startup journey, why have we flipped it on its head? Why are we starting with exit at the beginning and ending up with product market fit? Well, the reason for that really was that for all the business support people in the room and for the specialist advisors, I think we all get pretty frustrated because we come across companies that, for whatever reason, need to exit. They might, have to exit. It might be something that's forced upon them for various, either financial or personal reasons. But also, certainly, I've come across a lot of companies over the pandemic where they've just got jaded. It's the end of a long, hard journey. And what we find is that companies are stumbling into exit. They're not maximising the return on this investment. And by investment, I want to say it's more than just money. It's blood, sweat and tears. You come to the end, it would be really good if you actually maximise all that and make a really good profit out of your hard work. So that's why we turned it on its head, so that we're starting with the goal in mind, which is exit. We're working backwards, so that we want to make sure that all the elements that are needed to exit well are all in place to start off with. So that was kind of the reason for putting this kind of crazy upside down series together. So now I think I'll hand over to you, Malin. You're going to introduce everybody.
Yeah, I don't need that.
Oh, you don't need that?
No, it's fine. As I said to our helpful helpers, this is as close to my Britney Spears moment as I'm ever going to get, being all mic'd up. So it's very exciting. I'm actually not going to introduce you. You're going to have to do that yourselves. I think it will be, I can stand up here and talk about your wonderful journeys and how you've got here and all of that sort of thing, but I think our audience would much rather hear from you than from the lawyer in the room. So I will try to speak as little as possible and hand over to you. Robert, you're up first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Nicoll, and I've known Wendy for, I don't know, well over a decade, and she asked me to do this a little while ago, and I said yes, and then I got COVID, and suddenly realised I had to do this presentation and had to get my brain into gear. So if I cough, it's just because this thing's hanging around for a while, but I'm absolutely fine, trust me. I work in occupational hygiene, so I wouldn't put you at risk. I think I was asked about negotiations, and you just touched on something, Wendy, which my last slide just touches on this very briefly. In the world of environmental management and ecosystem management, people say, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 15 years ago. And the second best time to plant a tree is yesterday. So I think you can really take that metaphor and apply it to selling your business, because someone coming along with a check, today, you're not going to be best placed to get the real value of your business it depends who it is for that matter and what you've got. But generally speaking, I think actually thinking this through ahead of time is really useful. My opening slide here is about negotiation, who you're going to be negotiating with, and pretty much everyone. Yourself, your partner, your buyer, who immediately jumps to mind. It's the person buying your business, but trust me, they're the least of your worries. Your customers, because they'll probably say, we want to talk to some of your customers. So suddenly you've got this very tricky situation where you're going to be telling your biggest customers, because they want to speak to your smallest customers, your biggest customers, we've been working together 5 or 6 years and I want to sell my company. And the people that want to buy it are going to come and talk to you and ask you some tricky questions. That's quite a negotiation in itself. Professionals, you can't do this on your own, trust me. You really, really can't. And actually having a group of people that you truly trust and you're on the same wavelength with is, I think, is really critical. Other shareholders, if you've got other shareholders, and most people do, and it will get bumpy. It's a bit of a bumpy ride. But I tell you what, once you've done it once, you want to do it again, if you're like me, because most people that are founders are, there's a slightly strange part of their brain that likes to go through the same pain. So why listen to me? The reason I put this up there shows you just how mad I am. I founded 3 companies, one in the States, floated a company, bought several businesses, I delisted the company, split them in half, sold one, sold the other during a pandemic, and sold a business in the USA, and now I'm liquidating the thing that put them all together in the first place. So I've done quite a bit. The interesting thing is, I mentioned about professionals, the lawyer that I used took me through all of these journeys. And so getting to grips with, getting to know your professional people that are going to support you in this, whether it's finance or legal, is really helpful because you're on the same wavelength and they understand you as an individual. I think the context of the discussion today, actually understanding the journey that you're going to go on, is actually quite fundamental. You're going to find your buyer, okay, and then you're going to have something called agree heads of terms, and then you have this really painful process where you probably want to slit your wrists, called financial due diligence, legal due diligence, possibly commercial due diligence, and then you're going to have this day which I call the crunch, which is a bit sort of play on the rugby term, when everything goes to hell in a handcart. Trust me, it will. You'll just want to back out. I was chatting to Andrew earlier. He had the crunch too, and the whole thing's really painful. And then you'll have the sale, and then you'll have the money. I haven't put in here regret, because you will have that probably. And then you'll get the legal fees, which will surprise you, or hopefully not. And then you might have a cruise, but in my case, we had a pandemic and I couldn't do anything. This point in the process is really important, because that's when the financial bit hits you. And what you have to remember is, it's not the company that's bearing this cost, it's the shareholders, okay? So when the bills come through for the sale of the business, the shareholders have to bear that cost. It's not a company cost. So as you go into that part of the process, it's starting to clock up. And people that buy companies for a living know that, and they play on that. Because when they take you to Le Crunch, you're already stitched up for 80 grand. Something to bear in mind. So where can you negotiate this? Heads of terms, and I'm going to really concentrate on that. The heads of terms are a critical part in the negotiation process, because everything after the heads of terms is pretty much set down in tablets of stone. There's very little you can do. But if you refer back to the heads of terms, then that's the sort of linchpin, if you like. You can say, well, we agreed it in the heads of terms, and they can't move away from that process. They can back out, of course, because they might not like it, but certainly they can't start arguing that you've got to pay their legal fees too, which is something to bear in mind. And then you've got the crunch day, when everything that you thought you'd agreed suddenly disappears into smoke, and you realise they don't have the money they said they had, or the authority that they said they had to spend the money which you thought you were going to get, and then you have to negotiate around that process. But of course at this point you're already 50, 60, 70, 100 grand in on legal fees and financial fees. Essential that they are. I'm not making a point about that, but it does add up quickly. So then there's another question. Do you tell your staff? Now, I've sold 2 companies, and on one occasion I told the staff. Mixed views about the success of that. And on the other occasion I didn't tell them at all. That probably went slightly better, if I'm honest. Although if you've got share options with staff, then at some point you're going to have to tell them, and you're going to have to tell certain people, because it can't be a surprise to your finance director, because you won't actually get it very far without them being involved. Something to bear in mind, not all buyers are the same, okay? Trade buyers using their own cash, if you've got Microsoft after you, then they've basically got extremely deep pockets, and they'll buy you for a multitude of reasons. Americans, I think, call it put you in the closet, basically, because you're a competition. They want to just stick you somewhere, take you out of the way because you're a bit of a nuisance, and they'll spend silly amounts of money. Other trade buyers, they're often using someone else's cash, and then you've got the whole PE, private equity piece, VC type stuff. The important thing to bear in mind is, regardless of what they say to you, there will be rules around this money that they're going to use to buy you. There will be rules, whether they're gearing it through the bank, whether they're going to their shareholders, whether they're going to some sort of PE-backed type thing. There will be rules, and those rules will land on your desk at some point in this journey and create some pain. So you found your buyer. You've got your heads of terms. Heads of terms is not a particularly complex document. I mean, I've signed probably 5 of these in selling businesses. I had 3 attempts that didn't come off, 2 that did, and the heads of terms are actually relatively straightforward documents. Mostly people that write these, they've pretty much written them on the back of a fag packet, in my experience, and then they're sort of throwing them at their lawyer, who's sort of scratched their heads, and then I've thrown it at my lawyer, who's probably had a phone call with their lawyer and said, who are these people putting these things together? But it's really critical to get it right, because it sets out the terms of the discussion going forward. As I said earlier, it's that reference point. When you get into the nitty-gritty, you can say, well, that wasn't in the heads. This is not what I was expecting. That's not what you said. And I think that gives you that leverage. Well, that's what I just said. They do come in all shapes and sizes, but I would strongly advise that whatever you do with these heads, whatever format they come in, you do run them past someone that's got some legal qualifications, because there are elements of them certainly that can be used in anger if needs be. So it's probably worth getting someone to just eyeball those. But I would say, and I think the legal people in the room would agree with me, that's not a massively expensive exercise. If you give a lawyer a set of heads of terms to look at that you're talking to somebody, you know, you're not going to be in for tens and tens of thousands of pounds, because it's maybe a document that's 3 or 4 pages long. And they should better look at that and say, yeah, you're not letting yourself in for anything that's horrible. Just go and have a chat, but beware of what it means. So you're in the heads in front of you right now. This is the time when I think most of the heavy lifting negotiation happens. So in that, there's this term debt-free, cash-free, which everyone accepts as the sort of opening gambit. But then you've got things like working capital adjustments. Now they're great fun, because that's basically working out what capital needs to be left in the business after it's been sold. And there's lots of ways to interpret that, you know. So working out the working capital adjustment for a business that's just gone through a pandemic is very different from one when it was normally operating. So which one do you do? Do you do last year's, or do you do one 2 years before? So you can negotiate around that element. Completion accounts, lockbox. Completion accounts is basically when you create a set of rules at the end of the process the company's sold, and they give you 80% of what the consideration might be. You know, so you get your 800,000 of $1 million if you're selling it, and then the other 200,000 you fight over through the completion accounts. And that's a bit of a delicate area, because nobody really understands them, completion accounts, in my experience, because lawyers say, well, it's really an accountant's thing. And then accountants look at it and sort of say, well, there's a bit of lawyer stuff in here, and you sort of have a little bit of a chat about it. Lockbox is basically when, best way to describe this is, you agree at a point before the sale about what all the costs are going to be in the business running up to the sale. Now that's very difficult having lockbox if you're not going to tell any of your staff, because suddenly you've got this founder that's quite flamboyant and spending money left, right and centre, and suddenly says you can't spend a penny about anything. So what's going on here? So there's different things. The payment schedule, whether you're locked in or not, non-compete, you know, after the process. I was chatting to a good friend of mine who was an investor in my businesses. He's a big in telecoms. And he said every single business that he's bought, and he's bought a lot, the founder has gone on and recreated that business afterwards. He's never known a single example when that's not been the case. So you need to have a little think about what it is you plan to do with your money afterwards, and whether or not actually going back to work and rebuilding what they've just about destroyed is something that's going to be in your makeup or not. The timing of the whole thing. So I had one deal which kept going on forever and ever. Let's extend extend the heads of terms. Now that's all well and good for the person that's buying you, but if you're selling a business, it's really painful. It seems to take forever. Exclusivity around the whole sale process. I'll touch on that in a minute. So most people, when they jump into that, into the process, they only want to be talking to you, and they don't want you to be talking to 2 or 3 other people that also have got an interest in your business. And if you play around with that, you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble. Costs. This is one that actually is very easy to negotiate. Almost guarantee they'll come back and say, we want you to, you know, if it all goes belly up, then you know, there's £50,000 of costs. You've got to pay my costs in this process. So you've now got £50,000 of your own costs, and they're going to say, well, you've got £50,000 of my costs too. Just say no. Is my stance on that particular issue. Make it 10,000. You know, say, you know, we'll pay you £10,000 or 20 grand, etc. Something like that. Just that's just silliness. Some of those numbers that come through. One of my deals, I bonus staff to actually make it happen, which was interesting. It's certainly worth thinking about that. Then you'll have something which always sets people selling businesses into the hills running and screaming. Warranties and indemnities, you will not get away with it. They are just a fact of life. And But you can negotiate around them, and there's a process which has just gone out of my head. Someone will help me in a minute, which basically you set out all your dirty laundry in a letter.
Disclosure.
A disclosure letter, that's the one I'm looking for. And then you can negotiate around the disclosure letter, which bits of it they don't like. So there's more negotiation done there. But how long that lasts for? So in one of my deals, I said, well, they wanted 3 years. I said, well, when's your next audit? And we worked out that we would just do it to the second audit. And that's something that you might want to think about. Joint and several warranties, they'll always stick in joint. That's the right way around, isn't it? Where they can get you for everything, or they can get any one individual for everyone else's issues. So you can negotiate that way, generally speaking. Vodka and tonic and tax, you won't get away with that. That'll be horrible. It'll be a great big part of the warranty. It'll be 20 pages long. And it will be 7 years, because I've never been able to negotiate that away in one of the two experiences I've had selling and the companies that I've bought. So that's something to think about. That's why I go back, when's a good time to plant a tree? 15 years ago. Having an accountant involved in your business and making sure it's absolutely crystal, clean as it can be is really important, because then you don't need to worry about that. And then restricted parties. I made this, alluded to this fact that you probably will 6 months later think, oh, I want to set up that business again. And then if all the people that you know are really good are part of the restricted warranty, and you can't go and talk to them about anything, then that's something you might want to think about. So you could turn around and say, well, in one deal I've got is 3 years, and the other one is 2. So that just opens up the door a little bit. In fact, it's 1 year in one of them, and it just gives you that option there. So these are the things that you can negotiate around. Doesn't need to be a heavy legal document, as I say, but my experience would be, if you're talking to several parties and then you decide to go with one, tell the one that you're talking to that you've had discussions with several other parties. And the reason for that is that when you fall out with that one, and there's a good 50-50 chance you will, if you then go back to party B, because you've fallen out of party A, and then party A gets wind of the fact you're talking to party B, they'll think you've been playing them off against each other for ages, and they can get a bit funny about it. So it's far better saying, look, going into this, I'm going to go and sit down with you for 3 months in this process. But just so you know, there've been several other people I've been talking to. Get that in an email or something. So it's so if we fall out, I will be going back to them, just so you're clear about that, so they don't come back and say, well, here's my legal fees and you should pay them, and here's my financial costs and this, that, and the other. So just be absolutely crystal clear with everyone. And I think the other important thing is talk to your legal and financial team. My experience is that you can pretty much get an idea of what this will cost you. And you remember my chain of events, that's really useful, because if you get, and every week I touch base with my lawyer and I say, where are we at to? Because if you do have to step away, and you're up for 20 grand, that's something you need to understand. And if you step away because you fall out with them and go off and they turn around, well, actually you owe me 60, so I would say keep on top of what those costs are looking like. And I think if you work with a legal firm for a period of time, I really would try and get into bed with somebody as early as possible in this process, long before, several years. I'm not talking about weeks, I'm talking about years. Just say, look, this is what our plan is in 5 years' time. Learn to work with them, understand them. They'll understand your business and what you're trying to achieve. And then you probably will be at a position where you say, look, give me some broad figures. Is it 40 grand? Is it 60 grand? Is it 100 grand? At least you know where you're at. I think hopefully my colleagues in the front here will agree with that. I'll flash through this. When you're negotiating, don't forget about the quality of your business. My experience of buying companies is a lot of them are terrible. Buyer beware has never been so important. as when it comes to buying companies. A lot of them don't have particularly strong financial information. Their HR records are terrible. There will be Frank, who was promised a bonus every year, but it's never been written down, and suddenly it comes, comes to fruition. And there'll be Mary, who was told that she owned 5% of the company, and now it's been sold, and she's saying, well, where's my 5%? So if you've got all of that really clearly written down, that's real value, and don't be pushed about on that subject. Sound operations planning, productivity, business information, etc. These are all real value things, and I underestimated the value of those in my first sale. And because we were a floated business, they were absolutely in tip-top condition, and I should have made more of them. Reliable and robust management, another key thing. The crunch day, there will be this point when everyone falls out with everyone. Keep you calm. Price chipping will start. That's what I call shenanigans. And I said in both the deals I did, if you start to chip the price, I will walk. And I did. And then they always ask you to come back. And I think that's absolutely, because they will find something. The whole due diligence process, apart from making sure they don't waste all their money, a good part of it is they've promised you 20, and in their boardroom they will be saying, we'll get this business for 16. I guarantee you. And that due diligence process is about chipping away at that price, finding reasons why they can devalue it. That's where the heads of terms comes in, because you can say, well, I told you in the heads of terms that Mary was promised 5% of the business. It's here. Oh, right, okay, we can't chip that then. And so that's why this all sort of links into that heads of terms. So the shenanigans will start. It won't be quite what you expected. Sometimes it goes up. It did in one occasion, in my case, because we showed that the business was growing in a better way. But be prepared for that and be resilient. I think this is where I would say, as an owner of a business, stay really focused about what you want, because both Andrew and I were chatting a bit. It's a little bit of, it's almost a grief process when you sell a business. It's quite strange if you care about it, that is. And and you're in charge, and you can decide how much money you want to pay yourself and all these sort of things. So suddenly you can't. So stay focused on what you want. But there's always a way forward. I've spoken too much. I'll sit down. But anyway, that's my heads of terms. Negotiate that. That's what I'd say. Thank you. Oh, there's my tree.
Andy, do you want to go next? Tell us about your experiences and your story.
Sure. So I don't have any slides. I'll just kind of chat through our experience, and then hopefully we can get into some questions. So I was actually quite therapeutic listening to a lot of that, because so many of the things that you touched on were things that we went through. So a bit of background on me. So my name is Andy. I was part of a company called Cultivate Software. My background is in sales and business development, product management stuff. But typically working with very technical businesses and products. We had a business which kind of had a few of its own products, but also had a lot of very, very strong software engineering experience. So we had a few products that we were selling, and then people kept offering us more and more money to build software for them. So when someone's offering you hundreds of pounds a day or £30 a month, it's quite easy to make a decision sometimes when you're in that position. So we started building a lot more custom software, and we focused on very high growth companies that were using technologies that we were very good at. And our proposition went from being around, we use these technologies and these processes to really understanding how fast growth companies worked and how those individuals within fast growth companies were under an enormous amount of pressure to build software. So we filled in this gap of being able to help businesses that were trying to build software very well and very quickly. So we started working with Deliveroo, and we built the payment system that was powering the whole of Deliveroo. So that was a very big client for us. We were a small team of about 9 people at the time. And I had kind of identified them as, ideal client for our services, they had lots of experience in the software that we were using, they were very well funded, and they're very high profile. So it was a good kind of client for us to go after. Everyone else in the business was an engineer, and I was doing everything else that was not building the software. So I was wearing many, many, many hats, far too many in hindsight, but that was a cool learning experience. So we, to your point about planting a seed, I think, or planting a tree, I had made the decision personally that, you know, we had a business that was doing well, but I didn't want to keep going as we were. So, you know, it was fine, but I wanted to do more, and it wasn't hugely exciting. So I very deliberately started suggesting things to Deliveroo and sending them things about our business and reminding them of certain values that we had and things that we were very good at doing that I knew or I believed aligned with what they were trying to achieve, and trying to encourage at least the potential of a discussion around that. And I think that's an interesting thing to consider, which is, as a small business of 10 people, or particularly as a startup, you're very different in the way that you think about process and the way that you think about spending money, about hiring, about growth, than a business that has, you know, in a business like Deliveroo's case, I think they have over $1 billion in cash in the bank currently after they've IPO'd. So they think very, very differently. And if you can slot yourself into their strategy and their direction, you become far more valuable than if you focus on talking about yourself and what you're very good at doing. And very quickly we realized that we fitted in with their longer term vision. We had a great team, we had a lot of technical experience, we were very aligned with them, we worked very well with them. So I started suggesting things to various good stakeholders within the business about us and making sure that they were very aware of how great we were and what we did. And then one day, after spending lots of time with them, you know, as our major clients, one of the members of the engineering leadership team approached us in a pub and said, "We'd like to talk about buying you." And I was just like, yes. It was one of those moments where you think, okay, all that tree planting, it worked, because, you know, it was great because I was sharing information, and then people were then parroting back that information to me in different ways, or other people had been talking about it. So that clearly worked to some degree. And then we started the process of the kind of negotiation, which was unbearably painful. And, you know, we were a relatively small business, but the negotiation process from that, starting that conversation to closing the deal, was 8 to 10 months, through which time we weren't talking to the team about it because we didn't want to change the arrangement. We were trying not to go after any new clients because we were kind of focused on this, but then became increasingly reliant on the business that was potentially going to buy us. So, you know, the idea that it was in any way easy, despite it being a simple transaction, is clearly not true. So we were going through this process, and I had never done it before. I had planted the seeds, and I was having those discussions. Everybody else in the business was very technical, very good at the accounting and the processes and everything else, but had never really done this before. So it was me in a little office in Edinburgh negotiating against this guy called Frank, who was in Deliveroo, who was, you know, he bought and sold companies for up to £800 million for Just Eat, and then just joined Deliveroo, and then I'm on the other end of the line trying to work out what the hell I'm doing, frankly. And I think that's a really important thing, is that, you know, we didn't know what we were doing, but we believed in the value of what we created. We understood what we were good at doing. We understood how we fitted into their strategy and their vision, and we genuinely believed in the value of our business. And I think that was really, really important, because, like Rob mentioned, they're going to batter you down. They're going to come up with all kinds of ways of changing things and trying to drive the price down and trying to drive the structure down. And we just had to repeatedly remind them how great we were in a way that was kind of subtle but very firm. And I think in a company like that has a huge number of moving parts and different people coming and going all the time, throughout that process, multiple senior people left and went away. So we really had to keep rebuilding those relationships and over that negotiation period, because it's the major thing for your business at that time, but it's not the major thing for a company that has, you know, thousands of employees. So there was a number of occasions where we had to almost reset the discussion and get everyone in the room and just repeat ourselves again and again and again about what it was that they were buying, why they were buying it, what the value was, reiterating that, that story, and then trying to consider how does everybody in this that's involved in this help us, or how can we be seen to make their lives easy or make them look good or help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. And we were lucky because we had some really solid folks within the business that really wanted to make it happen. So we could lean on them for kind of intel about, you know, who we might want to speak to or what we might want to get done. But I kind of mapped out that whole process of, okay, who are the people that are involved in getting this signed off? Because just because you have a stakeholder that likes you and wants to make it happen doesn't mean that their boss or their boss's boss or the CFO or someone in the decision-making process is going to say yes. So we went through this process of really, or should I say, I went through this process of just writing down, okay, what does the head of legal care about? What does the head of HR care about? What does the head of tech care about? What does the CEO care about? What does the CFO care about? And how can I position this as something where everybody wins whilst getting exactly what we wanted in terms of the structure, the valuation, and the kind of goals that we were looking to achieve? Because for us, it was really important that everybody in the business won and that we were able to do more of what we'd done already, which was, you know, give back to the tech community and all the things that they were aligned on. But we had to kind of keep reminding them, because if the CFO has a red line or a line in the sand that they won't cross, you need to understand how you can get them to cross that line. And that was definitely the problem that we had, which was we wanted a certain valuation. They didn't want to pay that. We had to make them think that it was a great idea to pay in both the valuation and the structure they wanted. And we were flying by the seat of our pants, frankly. And I had never even heard or read about different structures or ways of buying and selling businesses. And then I was trying to negotiate with someone who was extremely experienced in this space. And I know I probably sounded like I had an all right idea of what I was doing, but it was absolutely terrifying. And I remember being in this little office on my own, having this conversation and kind of sweating and being very excited about it. But just having that belief in what you were doing and not being forced in that position, to touch on one of the points earlier on, well, why is it that you're selling? Because if you're desperate to sell, then as you go through this process, that will become clear, I think, to the acquirer. And you know, people that work in buying businesses, you know, they do this professionally. It can get ruthless and it can get very, you know, you think, oh, we'll all just work it out because we want to make it happen. No, people's jobs are to get good value for money, and we had to understand who those players were. And I definitely, because we were in the process of, they're both our customer, and they were trying to buy us. We were able to kind of go and have beers or coffees and chats throughout the process to kind of gauge where people were in a way that wasn't purely in that negotiation period. And I think that really helped, because you could be very direct, you could, you know, jokingly suggest something, but not necessarily be jokingly suggesting something. And yeah, eventually, you know, we managed to get there after a huge amount of negotiation and back and forth. And the thing that we were talking about was, or slightly earlier, was the fact that, you know, throughout that process, we weren't telling our team. People were deciding to leave, and then we kind of had to have the awkward conversation of, and actually, it ended up leaking to the team, which wasn't great. At the time, and leaking actually within the community as we were in the process of doing it. And we came up against a whole number of issues, some of which I'm unfortunately not allowed to talk about, particularly if it's been recorded. But you cannot imagine what might happen. And the things that happened in our process were just, yeah, we just could not prepare for that. And I had to almost remove myself from the reality of what was going on by just, because when you're going through this process and you believe in what you're doing, you want to do the right thing, there was certain things that happened that were so against what we thought was going to happen that it became quite emotional, because you care about this, you're very invested in it. Surely we're just going to do the right thing. And then business happens, right? And people and lawyers and accountants and spreadsheets and models get thrown at you, and it really, you know, it was a very painful process. And I was so invested and focused on making this thing happen that it was almost not real when we actually achieved it, because I was, you know, head down for 6 to 8 months desperately trying to make this thing happen. And across the whole of that time, it could have fallen off, and it almost did fall off on so many different occasions. So I would say it's not even about whether or not you get to the heads of terms. That's obviously that was a massive step. But then after that fact, all of the things that might happen with the team, with changing priorities, with all of the different things that might happen, you just have to believe in what you're doing and trust your gut, and then make your way through all of those different hurdles that you're going to go through. And remarkably, we managed to do it, and it was great fun, and it was a great experience, and yeah, I want to do that again. So that was a little bit of an overview of what we went through, but I think it's maybe good to have some questions from folks, and we can delve into some of that.
Just before we take questions, I will spend. No, it's fine. Nobody wants to hear from a lawyer. I get that. I get it. I get it. I live it every day. Every day I live through that process, and so I won't take up too much time to talk about it. But I think you've both said it, which is, and again coming back to the great simile of planting trees. Find your advisors. The process is arduous and it takes a long time. You have to work with people that you like. You're going to spend 4 to 6 months talking to your lawyers, your financial advisors, your corporate finance advisors who found you the buyer or the investor in the first place. You've got to like us, right? Because it's a lot of time. And before that, the way to do that is start talking to them early. Get your house in order. Yes, we've talked about, frank promising bonuses and not documenting that, but talk to us, whether that's your accountants, your tax advisors, your lawyers, to get your house in order. Start building proper systems, start building proper document collection, build your data room, as everybody likes to talk about, but just know where the stuff is, so that when you get this 200-page questionnaire about your management accounts and your tax returns and your employment contracts, you kind of know where they are, or at least you know someone in the business who knows where they are, and you can get your hands on it quite quickly. So that's really important. So if you find that relationship early on, that will really help. I just closed an investment round for a local startup called the White Rabbit Pizza Company, and one of the things, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but one of the things they said was, remind us of this arduous DD process next time, help us keep track of these documents, can you keep a check on this data room for us and help us updating it as we go forward, because the DD process is painful. But we're here to help, and that's our role. But as part of your exit planning, and we're here to talk about exits today, I'm actually going to pick on my colleague Louise, because it's not just about your businesses. You are just as big a part of your business as your business is in itself. So one of the things you should be thinking about early is your personal tax planning, kind of what are you potentially going to do with this money that you're getting? What steps should you be taking? Louise, I don't know if you want to say something before I get the strategy completely wrong.
Yeah. I won't take up too much of everybody's time, because I appreciate that's not what we're here to talk about, but I thought it would be worth just mentioning. So I work with Malin, I'm a director in the private wealth team, and what typically crosses my desk is people exiting their businesses and quite often having a wealth that they never really anticipated that they would have, and all of a sudden, from an inheritance tax position, you are converting an asset that completely qualifies for relief from inheritance tax. So you're not going to pay any tax on the value of your business, certain subject qualifications, but you're not, into one predominantly that will be cash, and all of a sudden you've got a massive taxable asset within your estate, which will be subject to, 40% tax on your death. So quite often what I'm called on to do, and I'll give you an example of a chap who was selling his business to Microsoft for about 45 million. He was referred over to me from Deloitte, and what we decided to do was split out the shares, so it is actually possible to break up the company before you sell it. So we put a load of shares into a family trust before we sold it. So while the shares still qualified for business property relief, we set up a family trust, put loads of shares into the trust, and sold those shares within the trust, and that money was then set aside for his children. So he has his own windfall, but he has a great big pot of money that's now completely outside of his estate, that would have been subject to tax at 40% on his death, that's now completely inheritance tax free for his kids. Subject to, there'll be small tax charges as the trust goes on, but that's a much lower rate, 6%. So that's something I would definitely advise you to do, and the key point here is to think about that before you have what's called a binding contract for sale. So the minute you have a binding contract for sale, you lose your business property relief, so that trust becomes pointless doing. So when we were talking about getting in early, one of the things, with our corporate team I'll be saying is, when people come into our corporate team, speak to me early. You'll always have to have a quick 5-minute chat, but have those conversations early so that we can start planning for it. The other thing is, because people hate trusts, I'll just briefly mention there is now a new investment vehicle that you can use called a family investment company. So where people hate trusts and they don't understand how they work, another way of putting wealth outside of your estate is to have a family investment company. So quite often what my clients will do, put a load of money into a company, so roll over from one company to the other, put all the value, so you have alphabet shares, A, B, C, D, put all the value in one set of shares that's held for the children, but that none of those shares have any voting rights attached to them, so that you and your partner or whoever it may be can still run that company for the benefit of the children, but all the value is outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. And again, the key is to do that early. So I didn't want to kind of gate crash this party, but I thought it was just worth mentioning if you're going to do these things, start doing it early. And I'll be around at the end if anybody wants to ask me any questions.
And whenever you speak to a lawyer, they will make sure that we talk about this, as well as everything else about warranties and indemnities and DD and earnouts and all that. We will make sure that we talk about that as well. So you will be reminded, but just to kind of put it in your heads that it's not just about the business, it's also about you. Wendy, do you want to come up and join us? So Wendy is a brilliant corporate finance advisor. She will tell us all the things where we get it wrong in heads of terms and some of the things that you already touched on now that we're going into questions. Wendy, did you want to say a bit about yourself and what you do
just
before
very
we get in
briefly,
there?
yeah, I've been
We've
a
all had our go.
corporate finance partner originally with Grant Thornton and now with a boutique called HMT, which is in Henley. So I was trying to work out how many businesses I've taken through the process that you were talking about, but it's probably north of 200. Most of the deals sort of somewhere between 10 and 100 million. So I live that. And it's not so bad, but it's not your money.
Are there any questions that anybody wants to ask? Yeah.
Just looking at that Deliveroo example today, it sounds like it's potentially quite a lonely journey there. Is it something where you kind of almost, I don't need like somebody to hold your hands in terms of negotiate or somebody who was on your side and knew what they were doing as the process happened?
Yeah, it was reasonably lonely in that I'm sure Paul, who I work with very closely and still a good friend of mine, wouldn't mind me saying, Paul is, was and still is, very, very, very technical. He's not a business person whatsoever, which was great because we worked very well together. But when I was discussing, me and him were working very closely with lawyers and various other people, who, by the way, like, what I loved being able to do was just understand what our options were, none of the details, and then being able to make really good decisions. And because I'm not great at the details of those sort of things, but so yeah, little prod.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, it was difficult because we were trying not to tell anybody about it. And me personally, I was basically running the whole thing on my own, working out what I was doing with, no real idea what I was doing, frankly. And I'm lucky that I've built a big network of people over the years that I could go to for advice. And I actually was quite close friends with someone that was on the board of Deliveroo. I had previously been on the board of Deliveroo, so I could go and speak to certain individuals and advisors that I could say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying. So what I would typically do would be to come up with my strategy for the situation, and then arrange a discussion with myself, Paul, and then this individual, and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. And we had to, we walked away at the very last minute on that, the crunch, should we say. And that was my plan. It was, we need to reset because we're just being ripped apart, frankly. We were just, it was really hard. But having a really strong network is something that I've always, I spent a lot of time at meetups and at events, eating pizza for years and years and years, just trying to get in touch with as many great people as possible. So I was, when that time came, I did have good, very experienced people that I could lean on. But that doesn't make it any different when you're the person that's trying to close the thing, or you're on the call and you don't have people around you, and frankly you can't really say anything to anyone about what's going on. But there's that part of that is quite fun because you're responsible for it, and there's the rush of that. But I do think surrounding yourself with great mentors and people that can advise you and ideally multiple perspectives too, because depending on the situation that was going on, we would have multiple different things that we could do, and the advice would be different, frankly, depending on who we were talking to. So, I don't know if you have any other.
No, I agree. I mean, we've said it a few times. I mean, financial and legal advice is absolutely central to this, and they haven't got to work with these people after the deal's done. So, Richard, who did my deals, he said, "Do you want me to go into bad cop mode?" And he could chew their ear off, and you're good at it. And then he can step back from it, and I can build those bridges. And so it's playing to those strengths, I think. And I think those advisors are absolutely central to making it a success. You cannot do it on your own. It's just crazy to even think that you can do it on your own. And I think building that rapport, because they are, as you said, I mean that really is. You become very, very close, and then suddenly the deal's done, and you don't speak to them again, and they're off on something else, which is quite sad, really. I still owe a dinner to Richard. So, find the right people to support you, and if they're, and I think we're very fortunate in this part of the world. There's an awful lot of very good people that can do this sort of stuff, and take their advice and make use of them. At some point. And at the crunch, I've seen situations where my lawyer and their lawyer were really going hammer and tong, etc. And then it's a little bit like that scene out of Pretty Woman, when he says all the suits leave right at the end there, and it's a little bit like that. And then you can sort of build that rapport and then bring them back and what have you. So he was a nasty lawyer. I'm not saying forget that analogy, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. There is that. It's a game, and you're playing. You're working together to bring about the outcome.
I think on reflection, I was a bit naive about we'll just make it happen, and we can just be nice to each other because we have a good relationship. And we had to know when to kind of take off the friendly hat and put on the more serious hat. And and I think that was a big learning, and at what point to be slightly more forward or slightly more direct or slightly more, we'll just assume that this is going to work out, and inevitably it doesn't. So but that was a good learning experience, I think.
Again, with your example, it sounds like you're dealing with, I don't know, almost like this bodiless entity. I'm kind of wondering, was there one person who really owned it at their end and was ultimately would be the yes or no person, or was it sounds like it was all sort of done by committee, or I don't know.
So that person changed, which was a challenge. So we had somebody who was running it from the corporate team in some way, and then someone was hired as their boss, and then someone else was coming in trying to make their mark in the organization. And that's why I was saying earlier, it was really important to map out, who are the people that are making these decisions. Just because you think you have buy-in at a certain level, who ultimately is going to step in and say, no, you can't do that? And generally it'll be, if it's about the valuation or about the direction, it'll be the CFO or the CEO or the CTO if it's a technical business, because they're often responsible for spend and direction. So we had very good relationships with certain people in that space because we were already making their lives very good and they were happy with the work that we were doing. So we knew we could lean on them to, push higher up. But on the day where we walked away, I wrote this email that I am, very proud of, that really set out to every single person in the knowledge that this is going to have to go all the way to the CEO, because I know from my internal discussions with people that the CFO has basically said no to what we want. So we need to make it look like everyone lined up in here wins if we go with what we need. I sent that email, and then I got a call, and they said the other CEOs said yes. So nice one, basically, well done. But yeah, it was. Well, like I said, when those stakeholders change, or when someone new comes in, you've got to try and think from that person's perspective around. This is, if you're coming in a C-level position or a senior level within a business, people want to be seen to be having an impact and doing a good job. So how can you help them with that, as opposed to, you might need to reset that discussion or relationship. And that's why we had to do that 4 or 5 different times, and then eventually walk away at the very, very last minute. So absolutely not what I thought was going to happen, frankly.
Wendy, what are your thoughts on that? Because this feels to me like this is where you really come in and get what we need.
And I think that good cop, bad cop thing is really important. The separation between the principals and whoever's negotiating. Negotiating on somebody else's behalf is much easier than negotiating on your own behalf. I think the other thing is to understand. I mean, you're right. Understand where in the organisation decisions are made. It lots and lots of times I have conversations with companies who kind of go, well, we're going to do a deal and we've got really great relationships kind of at this middle layer of a very large organisation. The truth is, as soon as you go into M&A mode, you're talking to whoever does M&A, and that's either an M&A team or it's the CFO or it's the CEO. So you're not talking to the same people, and they won't have the same drivers. The other thing about very large corporates, to be brutally honest, is you never really know what's going on in their heads about what their strategy is. So you can look at them and go, they should absolutely buy us, and they would look at you and go, yeah, but and that might be true, that you might be great, but actually this year we're doing that. And we're only going to look at businesses that look like that. So I would always say the best way to get best value is to run a process with your businesses. It's not to go to one party. Then even if that party is the obvious strategic buyer, if that's so, they'll end up buying you, and they'll end up buying you for the best price. But your negotiating position is infinitely better if you are talking to multiple parties, if you've done all your prep first, you're in the driving seat, and they're responding to what you're telling them, not them asking you for stuff piecemeal over millions of months. So it's about being in control of the process.
I don't think I need that, it's fine. Do I? Yes. All right, okay. In your business, you didn't really talk about the relationship because you kept it a secret. I didn't know if you had co-founders and what the relationship was with them and how that worked when you went to the whole selling situation.
So in this business, there was kind of the management leadership team, and we had that discussion as a leadership team, and we didn't involve anyone else in those discussions. And then we actually did a full day workshop where we discussed whether or not we should sell the business or we should go after it, and the pros and cons of each, which we actually worked with an external facilitator on, which was really helpful to help us ask the right questions, because as much as you might feel like you're on the same page as other people, particularly in a small business, if you join a 9-person business, you don't necessarily want to work for a 3,000-person business. And you joined our culture and our team, not the culture of a large tech business. So we did that process of mapping out pros and cons, making decisions, and actually, although you maybe think you're on the same page and you want the same things generally, it's really helpful to have that discussion and be really, really clear about what everybody wants. Because then, as Rob was mentioning earlier, when you're negotiating things like, well, this person might want to leave, this person might want a particular job title, that person is probably, and it was very clear from our discussions that people had different interests. So we had to do that. And then I also think in terms of the team itself, we didn't assume that everybody would be happy with this outcome. So we really wanted to get ahead of the concerns that people might have. So in the same way of kind of trying to map out who do you need to convince, who do you need to speak to, or who needs to be happy with this situation for this to happen on the acquirer side, we took a similar question of what would our team be concerned about, and how can we get ahead of that and demonstrate the things that we're going to do to get ahead of it. And I'm a big fan of value proposition design, and we did a value proposition design exercise for our team. What are the fears they're going to have? What are the things they're going to be excited about? What are the things that they can gain from this? And how do we position it when we tell them that, way we're getting acquired? Not everybody's going to feel that way, particularly if it's a small team, particularly if if they're not necessarily aligned with working with a certain kind of business or whatever else. So we kind of got ahead of it and said, what are the worries, what's positive, what are the gains. Not everybody's going to care about being paid more money and having, and getting their options or whatever. How do we get ahead of the fears, and how do we address them, and how do we make sure that that's actually included in what we agree with the acquiring business so we can get ahead of that? So it was quite a lengthy process actually to work that stuff out, and not just assume that it was all.
So they didn't have equity then in the business then, Mark?
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
they did.
Everybody did. Well, they had options. Yeah.
Did you have a shareholders agreement?
Yes.
There's someone behind you, Wendy.
I think it's all very interesting. I was just wondering how deep the commercial due diligence can go sometimes.
Deep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the first business sale that I made, they wanted to speak to, oh blimey, probably about 10 customers, and so, I mean, that's a trick in itself. So you then got to speak to your 10 biggest customers, because they don't want to speak to your 10 smallest customers, and say, we're thinking about putting the company on the market. Are you happy to talk to these people? And that can take a while for that to happen. But generally speaking, I think we had very close ties to our top 10 customers, and it's the way you pitch it, and it turned out fine, to be honest. I think I overthought it and was more concerned about it than I needed to be. But yeah, they can. I think they spent about an hour on the phone to each of them, asking a whole range of questions. I don't know if what your experience you've got of that sort of discussion.
Commercial DD, trade don't tend to do as much of it as private equity do. Private equity are trying to learn the sector and the market and where your business fits into it, as well as they're trying to understand what the customer relationships are. So commercial DD for a private equity deal is typically much more involved. As far as customer diligence is concerned, buyers always want it. It's always sensitive. It's always a negotiation about how they get to what they need, and in many cases, they're not allowed to speak to the customers directly. So one of the ways that it often happens is some kind of a marketing survey where some of the questions that they weren't asked are asked on behalf of them by a third party, or the client themselves sits in a room and asks the questions with somebody from the other side sitting in the room so they can hear the answers. But it won't, it's no great surprise that it feels like a massive vulnerability to expose your customers to a potential buyer, particularly if it's a competitor, before the ink is dry on the paper. So it needs managing, but it can usually be managed.
I recall now, actually, how we pitched it. I think we pitched it along the lines of this was a potential investor in the business. So we didn't come clean with the fact that we were, I mean, that absolutely is true, but they were going to be the only investor in the business. I mean, the thing thereafter is, you've got a contract with them. There's a break clause in there if there's change of ownership. Every single one of them has it. I've not seen any that we've signed that haven't got a change of ownership clause in their contract, and they're trying to get out of that customer. Are you going to invoke your change of ownership clause? If we become a major, significant controlling party in the business, etc. And the reality is, they're not talking to this, the CEO of that organisation. They're talking to some middle management person who, take them out for a cup of coffee and say, well, when they ask you this question, say no. We have no plans to. The reality is, of course, they can say whatever they like. They're not going to get it in writing. And the day after the deal's done, they could invoke their 3-month or 6-month clause and do it. But I mean, I think it's more of a situation where they want, in that due diligence process, they want to be able to go back to the private equity, whoever it is that's funding this, saying we've had the conversation. No one really digs too deeply into what the conversation was about, I suspect, but we've had the conversation and it all seems fine, blah, blah, blah. The truth of the matter is, if as a business you are critical to the services that customer are using. That's far more of a tie to them than any contract that you could sign, because they can't shift. It's just the way it is. I mean, like your relationship with Deliveroo would have been one that you're a critical component of the way they operate. So, they've got to rethink the way they deliver their business if they want to stop that contract happening. But it is sensitive. It is a bit awkward. I spent 2 weeks ignoring it, if I'm honest, and then it didn't go away, so I had to address it. So,
I think the only thing I would add to that is we've talked about commercial DD and customer DD. If you are into software, quite often they will want to send in their software team to spend a day, and this is where you need to be really careful, and your lawyers will try to protect you, but that's Wendy's role as well, is to make sure that the people who come in to really dig into the code can look at it, but they can't touch it, and they certainly can't write anything down, and they can't take anything away from you. Not obviously everyone's very nice and we're all going to play by the rules, but it's making sure that the information and the really deep know-how that you have and that's particular to your business isn't going to walk out of that room with the person coming to really, really delve into your commercials.
Hi, I've got 2 questions. One, when you sort of started the process to sell to Deliveroo, did you sort of get any education as to negotiation, what deal? Oh, sorry. Oh, fair enough. Oh, sorry. So when you started the negotiation process for Deliveroo, did you sort of take kind of formal courses to understand what sort of a deal is, negotiation is, and stuff? And then secondly, what are you doing now?
But I did go and talk to people and Google things and start working it out. And we kind of, the way that we'd set it up, we knew roughly what we wanted, and then we kind of wanted them to make the first offer, and then we just worked it out from there. So, like I said, we were in quite a strong position in one way, because we were very critical to what they were doing, and we knew that we could keep repeating that, and we would, that wasn't going to change given the direction that we were going in and they were going in. But they were also in a position of, somewhat in a position of power, because we were there, we were reliant on them because they were the source of the majority of our revenue. And then we'd even made the decision to not take on any other clients because we were going through this deal process. But that put us in a position of weakness. But every day that we didn't sell the business, we were able to charge them. So it was kind of it was a funny one, because we were using that to say, well, we can just keep going back and forth if you want, and you can keep paying us every single day, or we can make this happen. What am I doing now? Probably too many different things. So I started a record label, which is like a fun passion project, but that's actually doing really quite well now. I'm running an early stage startup in the restaurant food tech space. Me and one engineer that was started by some food tech investors that I know who've all exited businesses. I'm on the advisory board of a few startups, a death tech startup called Biscuit Tin, a DeFi crypto startup called Nova Finance, and then I do some consulting work around kind of product and value proposition design. So working with very technical companies to help them actually understand what problem they're solving for a business, as opposed to why their tech's really great. So doing a lot of that, and I've really enjoyed that process of doing kind of early stage stuff again, working on this restaurant tech startup, because just because you have a really solid understanding of the market doesn't necessarily mean that you can build and sell something that is that a company wants to buy. So yeah, probably I'm trying to work out what I want to do next, and I want to get back into building something and working on it full time, and then ideally going through that exit again.
Wendy's telling me that the white wine is getting warm outside. So just before we wrap up, and thank our lovely panel for their time today, one thing I would say is, like any doctor would tell you, please don't use Google for all of your professional services. We would much rather that you phoned us. whether that's me and Wendy or your other accountants and lawyers and everybody like that, we are just at the end of the phone or at the end of the email, we are super happy to talk to all of you about any thoughts, concerns, just to spitball ideas and kind of what if this and what if that. We are not just going to charge you lots of money, but that will be a conversation at some stage. But we really do, and that's why we're here today, we do really just want to have the opportunity to work with you, help you shape your future, and even though we're about doing it back to front, and we're going to talk about scale up next time, that's why we're here, and we want to help you deliver the right thing for you and for your business. So talk to us, please, don't just use Google.
For the avoidance of doubt, every penny was worth it.
Good, I'm
Seriously.
glad.
I mean, I'm trying to make that point. I mean, there comes a point where you're committed financially to these services, but they are absolutely essential in what you're doing. You wouldn't operate on yourself. That's the way I look at it, unless you're particularly daft.
So on that note, unless there are any other questions, if we can please give our panelists a great big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. And there are now refreshments, drinks, food, snacks out in the entryway where we all came in to begin with. Thank you very much for joining us. That's great. Thank you so much. I don't know, I need to be de-mic'd now. I don't know if we can.
Pull mine out from where it is.
I know. Don't know if